I'm Dara Mitchell, 29, and after 5 long years, I'm going to face my estranged family. They're celebrating my sister Heather's birthday tonight at Mason, one of the city's most upscale dining establishments. Engagement, they've constantly evaluated my career choices, disregarded my culinary. Under our family name, but they have no idea how much has changed since I left. My stomach aches as I adjust my basic black dress. Sometimes the most difficult decisions to make are related to your own history before I. Tell me where you're viewing my story in the comments section below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Have you ever had to prove yourself to someone who ought to have trusted you from the beginning? There was something really special about growing up in Greenwich, Connecticut for my family. The Mitchells weren't only. My parents, Margaret and Richard Mitchell, left us a bequest of riches. Their identities based on status indicators, the appropriate address, the appropriate schools. Appropriate occupations, our big colonial house held events where my mother would show off us kids as accessories, showing off how well we fit her in exact proportion to how well we fit her. At garden parties, she would share with her friends her vision of success. The Mitchell children are destined for greatness. Father gave a nod of approval behind his whiskey glass, and Ethan's promise is evident in the fact that Heather has already fixed on Yale Law. He'll be a great investment banker in maths when visitors would. My mother would unavoidably turn to face me, the middle child, and her smile would practically. Unbelievably, Dra has artistic tendencies. She'll figure out what. She meant that while Heather did well in debate club, I was the family's failure. I spent hours in our cleaner Alina's domain, and Ethan won math contests. A kind-hearted Greek woman named Elena in the kitchen saw something in me. Because you have the hands for this profession, and my parents couldn't truly be passionate about it, she'd say as I assisted her in properly chopping vegetables or kneading bread dough the way you. By the age of 13, I was making food that you could taste, smell, and comprehend in your spirit. By the age of 16, I was throwing covert dinner parties for my. The kitchen became a haven for me when my parents were away. My father said when I mentioned culinary arts, I felt most like I was cooking a servant's work. Mitchell's hires chefs during my junior year of high school, but they don't become them in order to placate them, so I applied to business schools before enrolling at Dartmouth, where my dad and. Even after my grandfather left, I managed to pursue my genuine passion. Studying nutrition classes and electives in food science that I could defend as being related to business administration, I built a covert nightclub in my flat that charges. Paying students for creative 5-course meals will help me finance my covert weekend courses with local cooks. Life went on until I was 6 months into an MBA program at graduate school. Made me quite sad when French gourmet expert chef Laurent Bisset, after tasting my food, went to campus for a lecture series with 3 Michelin stars. I had assisted in catering meals for a university ceremony when he grabbed me aside and asked, "Who?" His eyes were serious but his accent heavy. "Taught you to make a reduction like this?" he inquired. "I taught myself, He gave me his card after admitting to experimenting with books and films, saying, "You are wasting. Your talent is here. Come to my New York kitchen and I'll make you great." 2 weeks after the night that altered everything, I stood in my parents' spotless living room and explained why I was leaving my Master of Business Administration program to go to culinary school, the quiet that. My announcement was met with the loud words, "This is absolutely unacceptable." At last, in a dangerously hushed voice, the father stated, "We have put everything into your education." Aside from respect for what I truly desire, I shot back at my mother's face. "Hardened if you continue this pastime without our financial assistance." Alternatively, Heather laughed icily every time she returned from her first year of law school. "Let's see how long you can continue to cook for minimum wage," Ethan, rebel. Working for a prominent financial company just looked ashamed of me, so I quit. The following 5 years were more difficult than I could have imagined, starting that night with just my own funds and a tiny luggage. Known to work 18-hour days while sharing a small flat with 3 other people. Taking out loans to go culinary school, but I flourished under Chef Lawrence's guidance. The intensity, discipline, and inventiveness of the kitchen nourished something within of me that business school was unable to provide. Then an investor who had sampled my food at one of Lawrence's parties presented the chance that would alter everything. Asked me to consider a business proposition. 2 years ago, Mason debuted, and I served as executive chef and part owner. 6 months later, I bought out my partners to start my own business. I was aware of the irony that I had ultimately used my business degree, albeit not in the manner my parents had intended. Intended Masons swiftly rose to the top of the city's reservation difficulty list. Through all of this, we were highlighted in Food and Wine magazine's Future of American Cuisine issue last month. Kept my distance from my family, making sporadic phone calls to my mother to send her holiday greetings, but nothing. Significantly, they were aware that I was utilizing food, but they didn't know about my real achievements. I purposefully kept it that way because I wanted to be recognized for my achievements on my own terms, rather than as a method to ultimately gain their acceptance. So when Heather's engagement dinner invitation arrived in an embossed form, I was taken aback by my apartment, but what was even more startling was where my own. Naturally, they couldn't tell it was mine. They most likely picked it because it was prestigious and striking. Ideal for displaying their status. Therefore, after days of consideration, I chose to accept, not to get approval, but maybe to end chapter 5 at last. Years of separation had given me perspective, and I felt confident enough in my accomplishments to confront them without. What I hadn't expected was how it would feel to watch them eat at my restaurant, crumbling under their scrutiny. Critiquing the food I had put so much effort into making, but it was precisely what I expected when I pulled open Mason's enormous glass doors that night, prepared to assume the role of the. One final time, the familiar aroma of Mason filled my nostrils as I struggled with black sheep. I entered and smelled the delicate scent of fresh saffron-reduced wine. Herbs that I demanded be given twice a day, generally with this scent. Reminded me of everything I had constructed today, which just made me feel more. Nervousness, I had picked out a basic black dress that was actually one delicate string of pearls that had belonged to my grandmother was Diane von Fenberg's accessory. My status-conscious relatives would probably interpret my elegance as being overly forced. Due to financial constraints, my hair was pushed back into a smooth, shiny style. They would most likely assume that I couldn't afford appropriate styling. My senior server, Marcus, saw me right away, and his eyes widened a little. I asked him a question because I don't often enter through the front door as a guest. He nodded covertly and went on after I gave him a small shake of my head and mouthed the words, "Not yet." I could immediately tell they had his responsibilities from the entrance. Naturally, they had the center table that my mother in Chanel had asked, and it was set out like a tableau of wealth. With intense focus, my father was looking over the wine list while wearing what appeared to be new season Gucci. Bradley, a man I didn't recognize, sat next to her, probably sporting a slicked back. Ethan's hair and a watch that illuminated whenever he moved his wrist. Allison, his wife, finished the photo wearing business clothes, as if they had just left crucial meetings. Celeste, my hostess, came up smiling broadly and said, "Good evening, Ms." Just in time, she heard herself saying, "Your company is already seated. May I show you to their table?" "Celeste, thank you," I whispered, admiring her prudence as. When we got close, my mother saw me first, and she quickly assessed me. I recalled a head-to-toe scan from my early years that estimated the value of my appearance, and she responded, "I found it lacking," and rose to kiss my cheeks, saying, "You finally arrived," and we started to question whether I was on time, Mother, I answered. At precisely 7:30, my father stood and gave me a firm embrace while I checked my watch. Concluded with an uneasy back pat, saying, "You look healthy," which in Mitchell's words indicated that I had not maintained the somewhat unhealthy thinness that was valued in our social group. Heather hardly bothered to get up and give me a cheek kiss, saying, "This is Bradley." As her fiancé stood up and held out his hand, she declared that his hold was too tight. I recognized this power tactic from my many business meetings while I was an undergraduate at Princeton. He introduced himself as a Wharton MBA who recently became a junior partner at Goldman. Just your qualifications and status, Mitchell, or I've heard about you. Ethan's wife gave me a more sincere greeting in the family love language. When I discovered that Allison had been entrusted with locating something remarkably exclusive, her grin appeared strained. Well, my mother said, anxious about whether the restaurant for tonight's meal will live up to everyone's expectations. Stated, I hope we've already ordered champagne, as I sat down in the final available seat. That's okay, I saw that they had selected the second most costly option on our list, which is ostentatious but not careless. Normally, the restaurant was bustling with the energy I had put so much effort into. Adjusted the lighting so that it was both intimate and bright enough to recognize each piece's exquisite plating. Furthermore, the sound level was ideal for balancing seclusion and discussion at the tables. Just far enough apart to allow for discretion, yet close enough to generate energy. I had chosen every element, including the weight of the linen and the specially made seats that enticed them to stay. I observed the staff's subtle reactions when they discovered I was seated with them without feeling uneasy. I was looking at the visitors when Jose, our sommelier, came over with the champagne. When he raised his eyebrows slightly to indicate if I wanted him to acknowledge me, I gave him a subtle but good shake of my head. Rather than presenting the bottle with studied elegance before starting to pour, he said to my father, commemorating an engagement that my father unnecessarily declared in the hopes of receiving preferential treatment. Mason is thrilled to host such a spectacular event. Congratulations, Jose said with ease. Hey, I'm shocked that you were able to make a reservation, I responded naively, I've heard. I know people, Bradley remarked, leaning forward, it's quite difficult. Wink so arrogant that I had to hold back an eye roll when asked to do a favor for a client who is good with the management. Craig Winters, one of our frequent investors, was probably the client. Occasionally, I asked for tables for business associates, and I mentally noted that I needed to talk to him about Bradley. My father said, aren't you resourceful, as I raised my champagne flute to Heather and Bradley. We clinked glasses and I took a tiny drink, observing that the champagne had been provided, match and a brilliant future. At the exact temperature I had instructed my employees to keep, so my mom started. Putting down her glass and giving me her whole attention, tell us about your activities over the last few years. Been so enigmatic that 5 pairs of eyes on the table turned to me. I've been working in food, so I'm ready to criticize, but I stated I'm just learning. As if I had confessed to it, Heather sighed, growing motionless with that cooking period. A terrible addiction. I assumed you would have moved on to something more significant by now. Ethan added that not everyone can manage the corporate path, making his response seem like a Bradley critique. What exactly do you do? Line cook catering various roles, I said, perplexed. Faintly responded, I've worn many hats. Well, we're just happy that you're able to. But my mother continued with a phony grace I was familiar with, support yourself. We've always stated that if things become too difficult, our door is open. I saw Jessica, one of our most seasoned. A bite-sized orb of compressed watermelon covered with fermented black vinegar is presented by servers as they approach. I purchased garlic and a microgreen from a specialty urban farm. She declared the kitchen's praises, placing one carefully in front of each diner. She gave me a fleeting look of devotion before slipping back into. Is this all? Heather said in professional mode, analyzing the single bite with. I said that it was amusing, but I'm hungry. I am aware of what an amuse-bouche is, but the meal hasn't even begun yet. I'm not culturally illiterate just because I chose law, she snapped. Rather of experimenting with food, I observed as they each sampled my product. Mom took the tiniest nibble, ever mindful of my father's calorie intake. Hardly stopped to taste it before popping the entire thing in his mouth, but Ethan and Allison at least appeared to enjoy it. Bradley, meanwhile, pretended to be a wine expert and used phrases that had no culinary meaning to analyze the flavors. Heather was the only one who didn't touch hers. I don't do raw garlic, she said, despite the fact that the black garlic was anything from raw. It had undergone a 60-day fermentation procedure in a temperature-controlled setting, which I had mastered after 3 years of experimentation. I noticed the flash of our server clearing the platters. When I saw the despair in her eyes at Heather's unfinished work, I, protective not of myself but of my employees who were so proud of the work we did, I had constructed M's own not only as a restaurant but also as a kind of family, united not by blood but by a same passion. The evening was only getting started, but I could already sense the old dynamic taking hold. I was the outsider, someone who had made poor decisions that required explanation, but in contrast to the Dara of 5. I sat at this table years ago with a secret strength that would soon completely change the dynamic, so say. As our first course arrived, I purposefully turned back to Heather and asked her about the wedding arrangements. Beautiful combination of homemade ricotta, basil oil, and homegrown tomatoes that I spent months perfecting. Heather brightened right away, and we have a reception for 100 people at St. Thomas Church, of course, in the square. The guest list is becoming cluttered, even though Mom believes we should reduce it to 350. The Astor Williams haven't spoken to the Bennett since that regrettable yacht incident, so my mother interrupted, so we cannot sit them in the same part. I stifled a giggle at the seriousness of their discussion on these social. I've always been amazed by calculations, and I've ventured hundreds of times. Biting into the tomato dish with a broad forward line, it's networking in more ways than one. Half of the invitations to the party are relationship investments, specifically mine. Dad concurred that Bradley is aware of the social capital component of this wedding. What about you, Dar? Heather Caliber opens doors, her tone abruptly changed. Are you still too preoccupied with cooking, or do you have any exciting opportunities ahead of you? She had scarcely touched her dinner, as I could see by the way she pushed the heirloom tomatoes around her plate. In indifference, I responded with career Ethan, since I'm currently focused on my career. My mother joined in, repeating, "Is that what we're calling it?" with a little laugh. Dara, my friend, you must be considering getting married at the age of 29. There's that beautiful. He works as a hospital administrator and is Margaret Whitley's son. I think he's quite steady, and I don't want to be set up. Well, mother, as each year goes by, your options will become more limited. Persisted before I could reply to our server, particularly in your case. Seemed to finish the first dish, but I was too stressed to fully appreciate the taste of my own creation. Jessica questioned Heather, noticing that she was almost full if there was an issue with the dish. Heather dismissively said, "The meal is overly acidic and the tomatoes could have." I bit my tongue because those tomatoes had been picked when they were at their ripest. From an upstate farm that grew just for us that very morning. I apologize, Jessica responded diplomatically, and I'll make sure to let the kitchen know. The second course arrived pickled ramps and seared scallops with a brown butter emulsion. I was very proud of the spring special, which I saw as the dishes were put down. My father said, "Now this looks promising," cutting through the reactions of my relatives. Badly swirled his wine with his fork into his scallop, and I had a Sancerre. Carefully chosen to go with this dish. This place doesn't have a good wine list. Outstanding but passable. When our salesman Jose heard this as he was walking by, I glanced at him and smiled subtly, realizing that Jose had been stolen from a 3-star. Dara had declined offers to collaborate with me from locations all around the world and was working at a Michelin restaurant in Paris. Ethan indicated that you work in the food industry, but you never really explained what that meant. Allison started, obviously wanting to include me. Before I could respond, Heather interrupted. She was most likely hosting. Somewhere right now, Dara is seating customers and distributing meals with that business degree. Actually, I started without feeling guilty about my father interrupting. Everyone must begin. However, I would have anticipated some progress after 5 years. I stepped forward and whispered into the Heather of Applebee's assistant manager. Heather Ethan, in a rare display of self-defense, smiled at her own joke. I'm being realistic when I say that she decided to forego her schooling because of this. I took a sip of wine and realized that my passion project acts have repercussions. Letting the well-known songs guide me, and how is law treating you, Heather? Her expression hardened as she remained at Henderson and Block. I'm currently vacillating between positions, genuinely taking. Bradley interrupted her because she was working too many hours to prepare the wedding. Stated to her, my wife doesn't need to kill herself at some firm once we're married, she can do charity work like my mother. Before Heather smoothed her look back, I saw a brief moment of bitterness, of disdain and irritation in her eyes. To everyone's amicable satisfaction, the third course, a pasta dish with one of our specialties is hand-rolled tagliatelle with spring peas, pancetta, and mint. My mother said the portion size here is ridiculous, referring to meals that had been featured in Food and Wine. All of this money for 3 pieces of the beautifully served pasta is approximately. Mother, I said, quality over quantity. The tasting menu is meant to take you through a variety of tastes and textures. Restaurants provided you with a suitable. My father complained that this new cuisine was a waste of money. To overcharge for less food, as I saw Bradley chop his noodles instead of swirling it, shattering the fragile. So how exactly are you affording a place like this on a food truck? I asked, rolling the strands by hand mourning. Service pay, this is one of the most expensive restaurants in the city, Heather said simply, and I felt all. I said I manage my finances carefully as the eyes turned to me. Oh, please, I said. A dinner here costs more than you probably make in a day, laughed Heather. I asked calmly, so how is he paying for this? Are you dadding? I'm not dadding anyone. Can you really afford this place? She asked whether you were maxing out your debt. Heather Ethan cautioned once more about using credit cards to maintain appearances. She insisted that we all alter our schedules for this, which is awkward, but I'd like to know. Supper that she recommended at one of the city's most upscale eateries. She's either not being truthful about her circumstances or she's being reckless with her money, the fourth course. A nicely grilled duck breast accompanied by farro chef and cherry gastry came. This duck is undercooked, but Miranda, who oversaw the kitchen when I wasn't on the line, did it perfectly. After a single bite, Bradley declared that the duck on his dish was perfectly medium rare, just as it should be. It's intended to be served that way, as I mentioned, and medium rare is the best. He motioned for the temperature of the duck breast, saying, I like my meat well done. When Jessica walked up to a server, he spoke without glancing at her. This is unfiltered. Take it back and cook it correctly. I noticed Jessica's eyes flicker with annoyance. I apologize, sir, for being hastily concealed by professional civility. I glanced at her as she picked up his plate and gave her a small nod so she would know too. Instead of destroying the current breast by overcooking it, have the kitchen prepare a new one, Dara, my mother. You still haven't answered Heather's question, how are you affording this dinner, was asked after Jessica had left. I could feel the same tightness in my chest as I had experienced during the table's tension. The feeling of being cornered, judged, and found during innumerable family dinners as a child. I wasn't as insecure as I had been before I'd even gotten a chance to speak. No longer a young lady, I had created something of which I was proud, something that was, for a little instant, wholly mine. Thought about telling everyone at once, then saw their faces shift when they recognized whose restaurant they were seated in, whose food they had been sloppily criticizing before I could make a decision about Bradley's. When the overdone duck was brought back, it had lost all of its nuance and softness. Initially had much better, he said after taking a mouthful, but I could see from the other side of the table that it was. My father motioned for the wine list once more, so let's order another one now that we're dry and tough. When Jose came over with the leather-bound list my father had made a show of, I decided to bottle something more impressive this time. Of analyzing it, ultimately indicating a Bordeaux, one of our priciest choices. At more than $800, this one ought to be sufficient, he said. I had chosen the bottle during a trip to France last year, where I met the vintner in person, so I knew it quite well. Although it was amazing, it was entirely inappropriate for the current course and the ones too. After that, could I provide a suggestion that would go better with the other dishes? My father waved me away. I believe I know my wines, but Dar Jose humbly asked for guidance. Let my father have his way, this wasn't the hill to die on. I gave him a slight nod. As the evening went on, the last savory meal was served, followed by dessert, a deconstructed lemon tart, which was one of my personal favorites. The work went on, and each dish received some feedback. My attempt to add something to the discussion somehow turned into proof of my failure by the time. After the coffee was served, I was emotionally spent from bearing the dual load of condescension from family members as I watched them carelessly criticize my life's work was getting to be intolerable, and then came the check that Marcus had been dreading and looking forward to finally arrived. My father reached for the black leather folder that held the bill and placed it covertly in the middle of the table. Because it was a patriarchal obligation reflex right now, but Bradley stopped it. Please, Richard, let me, he urged with the polished elegance of someone who has used even kindness as a means of gaining power. Think of it as my treat to commemorate the fact that my father made the customary modest protest before giving in. Observed Bradley's demeanor change from a confident smile to one of uncertainty as he opened the folder. Is there a problem? My father said, detecting the barely hidden alarm as he noted the sum. Bailey recovered swiftly, just verifying the calculation I was aware of. He was specifically looking at a 7-person dinner with fine wine pairings, special off-men demands, and that $800. Bordeaux would cost much more than $3,000, which is reasonable for a restaurant of Mason's level, but it was undoubtedly a declaration, and he grabbed his wallet, removing a black credit card slowly and purposefully to ensure that everyone seen the exclusive tier. Heather, who might have sensed his unease, decided. So draw, she added, referring to her previous interrogation. You never did explain how you're managing to contribute to this, she said in a falsely pleasant voice. Lavish meal, we wouldn't want you to overspend on our account. Everyone's attention returned to me, and I could sense the old dynamic resurfacing, with Heather being the successful one and me being the struggling letdown. I asked, can you cover my portion? And she leaned forward, pressing. The table grew hushed as the subject lingered because we all knew how much food service pays. The air was so purposefully offensive that my parents appeared uneasy. My mother whispered, maybe this isn't no, but Heather persisted, I want to know. We've spent the entire evening acting as though nothing is wrong and that Dar's decision, too. She hasn't been struggling since her schooling was thrown away, thus I believe we deserve some. To be honest, after 5 years apart, I felt a hot blush come up my face from my chest. Of creating my own achievements in life and nothing had changed, I was still being asked to be the family's disappointment. Bradley might be seeing a chance to reassert his authority in order to defend my existence. Control once the check shock was added, therefore if you need assistance with your part, please say, don't be ashamed that I don't need help, I said in a tense voice, but how? What exactly are you paying for? Heather insisted that the cost of this lunch is higher than you. I probably opened my mouth to reply in a week to ultimately reveal. Bradley abruptly scowled at the bill, saying, wait, there's a mistake. They've only charged us for the wines, not the food, he declared. Marcus received a harsh signal from him that said, excuse me, there's an error on our check. Marcus came to our table at the ideal moment, as if he had been anticipating this. In fact, he most likely had. As he put it, my staff knew me well enough to be watching this scenario unfold. Is there a problem, sir? Yes, you've only pointed to the bill and stated, they charged us for the beverages, not the meal. Marcus glanced at the check and then at me, his face asking a question as I decided to pull the hoax. Had continued long enough, so I nodded slightly to Marcus, saying, there's no mistake, Sir Marcus. Stated with ease that my father had handled the meal portion. Marcus scowled as he turned to face me, his businesslike manner giving way to a warm greetings, Miss Dara. Your regular table is prepared for your meeting. Would you like me to tackle the problem with the investors first? There was complete stillness across the table. "Thank you, Marcus," I replied as 6 sets of eyes turned to me in varying degrees of bewilderment and incredulity. Despite my intense anxiety, my voice remained steady as I said, "Yes, please close out Mr. Harrington's beverage tab." "The very good Miss Dar," he said, taking the remainder of the house as usual. "Miranda, Bradley's now slack grip chef, indicated in the folder that she would appreciate your—" I promised him that I would visit the kitchen before my appointment to get his thoughts on the new spring menu items. When Marcus left, I finally turned to face my family and saw their faces. Varied from perplexity to astonishment to the initial realization of what is taking place, my mother eventually managed, and I inhaled deeply as soon as I had both. Welcome to Maison I, which had been secretly awaited and loathed for 5 years. The stillness seemed to last forever when I said, "My restaurant." The first to regain his composure was my father, who repeated, "Your restaurant," his countenance changing from bewilderment to calculating. I explained that you work here without a parent, and I felt a strange sense of serenity sink in. I am the only entrepreneur and executive chef of Maison, which is owned by me. Heather shouted that this restaurant is among the most upscale in the city and has been highlighted in major Yes magazines. Last month, Bon Appetit featured food and wine. Prior to that, in their review last year, the New York Times gave us 4 stars. Bradley was looking at me as if I had suddenly began using tongues, but you claim to be a food worker, but you were evasive about everything because I wanted to see. I clarified how you would treat me if you believed I was having difficulties, and you have all made that very evident tonight. When socially unstable, my mother's hand fluttered to her pearls in a goaded motion. "Why wouldn't you tell us about this accomplishment, my love?" the way she stressed. Success made my decisions retrospectively acceptable in a way that spoke loudly. "Would you like the full story?" I said, staring at what desire alone could never do. After I departed 5 years ago, I continued around the table without waiting for a response. I used what little money I had saved to rent a small room in an apartment when I moved to the city. For the first year, I worked 3 jobs in a Queens apartment with 3 roommates. Line cook in a restaurant in Midtown, prep cook at a bakery from 5:00 a.m. to noon. I took a sip of water while working weekend shifts at a bakery from 1:00 to 10:00 p.m. Observing their uneasy looks, I slept for 4 hours every night and developed blisters. It burns my arms, so I spent my rare free time studying technique compulsively. Moments with Chef Lauren, who first inspired me to pursue a career in culinary arts, took me under his wing, and within 18 months, Ethan was observing me as his sous chef. Allison looked impressed by me with what seemed like genuine attention. 2.5 years ago, while I was working a private event at Lawrence, parents appeared to be in a condition of constant reevaluation. James Warren, a visitor from Warren Capital, sampled my special course. He was shocked to learn that someone so young had produced what he dubbed the most notable. As I gestured around us, James became my first taste of an inventive cuisine he had not had in years. Eventually, we discovered this area, which at the time I constructed was a closed nightclub. The concept created the menu, employed the staff, and managed every aspect of the lighting fixtures to the personalized plateware, but my father claimed that the price was his. The money that a restaurant of this kind in this location must have needed seems to be the only thing on your mind. James brought roughly $3.4 million for the initial investment. We welcomed 2 more investors right away, in part because of Lawrence's industry support. Relationships, and 3 months later we were profitable. I have been the sole owner for more than a year, and I exploited the restaurant's performance to get a loan and pay off my investors. Heather realized that you knew everything about her voice, which is why you requested that we meet here. Actually, no, I told her. Allison picked this restaurant, isn't it? Yes, Allison, everyone's attention went to Ethan's wife, who blushed profusely. I was unaware of this. I promised that Dara, the concierge at Ethan's company, suggested it as the most striking new eatery in the city. Didn't realize it belonged to you, of course you didn't. I told her that nobody in my family was aware that I had done that on purpose, so why keep it a secret, mother? I couldn't help the sharp, but if we were your family, we would have been proud. I couldn't help but giggle. Would you be the same family who hired cooking servants? Who abruptly stopped talking to me when I decided to go culinary school, and who only minutes ago, when they made disparaging remarks about my life decisions, my father cleared his throat. That's unjust, Dr. A. We were worried about your future and stability if we'd. I knew you had this level of business savvy, and that's just what I. Thus, you were unable to appreciate my passion on its own. It only holds significance for you now when it is associated with achievement. And just at that very time, Chef Miranda came to our table wearing her immaculate whites. Miranda Torres made an appearance with Chef de Cuisine embroidered on her breast. I apologize for interrupting Draw, but the Matsuhisa party has an impressive figure. Arrived for their sampling, an essay would like to finalize your interview with your publisher for the story next week. I nodded when you called regarding the cookbook cover design. Thank you, Miranda. Please let me know. As Miranda left, I noticed my family's increasing astonishment. I'll be there soon. Cookbook Heather echoed, and I verified that there are 120 recipes coming out this fall with COP. My mother's voice took on the persuading role as she started sharing intimate tales. How remarkable is the tone she employed when attempting to handle a social situation. Why didn't you inform us sooner? When I most needed it, you assisted me by cutting me off, and we could have done the same for you. We firmly believed it was a passing phase, and my father objected, asking how we knew you possessed such a strong sense of entrepreneurship that you obviously inherited my company. I experienced a brief moment of rage when he tried to take credit for my accomplishment. Forcefully stated, I built this myself without your connections, your money, or your support. Bradley, who had been unusually silent, became a cookbook contract that needs to be accompanied by a sizable advance, and here he pointed about gratefully, forgetting his previous comments. It must bring you a sizable income. Do you have any intentions to grow it? Maybe. I couldn't help but giggle at the restaurant group. I have some contacts in the hotel investing industry who might be interested. This shift from condescension to networking opportunities is transparent, and I'm doing really well with my current. Heather gave him a frustrated look before going back to face me, but thank you, advisors. You were building all of this, even though I believed you were having trouble. Yes, I responded simply, and tonight She persisted in her harsh tone, saying, let us sit here and critique your food and wine. Despite knowing that it was yours, I wanted to see how you listed your portion sizes. I outlined how you would treat me if you still believed that I was the family failure, but now I realize that sounds manipulative. Snapped, but rather than asking how I could feel the embarrassment that was causing her rage. I must be in debt or in a relationship if I can afford to eat here. I retorted that you weren't worried about me because I was fortunate enough to buy a lunch at this table. Heather, you were taking pleasure in your perceived superiority. The restaurant had slowly closed as the evening ceremony was coming to an end, Jose came up holding a bottle and said, You're. He responded, Miss Dara, special reserve cognac for your investors' meeting and the kitchen is ready whenever you are, according to Chef Miranda. Thank you, Jose, I said. Please let Miranda know I'll be there in 10 minutes. I turned back to my shocked family as he departed. I said, getting up from my chair, I have a business to run. Thank you for coming this evening. My mother said, don't go like this, Dra. We should enjoy your. Well, maybe this weekend we could all get together for brunch and truly catch up. At her, I saw for the first time not the menacing character of my youth, but just a woman attempting to preserve her status and pride. I'll give it some thought. Stated, but at the moment, I have a kitchen to supervise and investors waiting as I. Ethan got up and muttered, Dara, in a quieter voice than the others as he turned to go. For what it's worth, what you've constructed here is astounding. I apologize for not standing with you sooner, as the reactions have been the most sincere. I acknowledged him with a slight nod before leaving the table where I had just replaced the My family's dynamics forever. I had only gone 10 paces when I heard the. After hearing heels click behind me, I turned to see my mother rushing to catch up. Dar, please, she whispered, lowering her flawlessly maintained facade. You can't just walk away after making this revelation. We need to talk, she said. Regarding this, I looked toward the private dining area where my real investors were gathering to talk about financing my. We are awaiting the second restaurant concept, but I have to postpone it because I have a meeting with my mother. Said that you haven't prioritized your family in 5 years. Answered steadily, my business obligations don't just become optional because you finally. The rest of the family had joined her, forming an awkward cluster, once she determined that my career was worthy of your attention. My father became noticeably uneasy close to the bar area and was not used to. Heather's face fluctuated from being in charge of a situation, and perhaps we could continue this conversation tomorrow, my father said, expressing irritation and what could have been respect. Said in his businesslike, problem-solving voice, we have a lot to talk about at dinner, including how we might assist you in growing Bradley enthusiastically, as my company specialized and I don't require your assistance. I firmly interrupted. I didn't construct this location to finally gain your favor, rather I did so because this is the success of what I love, and what I'm excellent at doesn't automatically make my enthusiasm any more legitimate than it was 5 years ago. No one used to remark, darling, my mother backpedaled, we're just proud. Are you pleased with your accomplishments, mother, or are you relieved that my decisions no longer cause you social embarrassment? Her flinch informed me that I had struck close to home, which is unfair, and my father interrupted. No, I told him you wanted what's best for you, and we've always desired that. Matched your vision for me, but there's a difference now that Miranda is by my side. After 5 minutes, she remarked softly, her presence is a welcome support. The H. Ford Group is asking if you'll be joining them soon. Promised her, and I turned back to my family as Miranda nodded and moved away. I must go. Heather moved forward, her voice devoid of its typical piercing edge. I owe you an apology for the cruel things I uttered tonight. Sincerely, I responded, that's the bright side of this evening. Ethan joined the conversation by saying, that's unfair how you all see me when you think I'm struggling. People create opinions based on the information at their disposal. I said that we were unaware that you were unaware of my success. However, you were unaware that I was pursuing my passion, which ought to have been sufficient for my family to demonstrate basic respect. There was a long pause in the gathering. You're correct, my father at last stated, shocking me, that we ought to have encouraged your desire regardless of how it turned out. Richard Mitchell was important, yet he didn't readily admit his shortcomings. Or do we? From this point on, my mother asked with a rare tone of genuine uncertainty. I inhaled deeply as I thought about the question, in spite of everything these individuals. The harm they had brought to my family was genuine, but so was our common past. I had never wanted total alienation, just enough space to start my own life without their criticism interfering. My choices are still unknown, but I gave an honest response, and tonight has brought about one change. It's obvious that if we want to continue dating, we must do so on separate terms because I'm not the family. Failure in need of atonement, I am a prosperous chef and business owner who merits the same regard you would accord any. Naturally, my father promptly agreed with other professionals, which implies there won't be any more remarks regarding my life decisions, no more unsolicited career guidance, and without a doubt, no attempts to network through my restaurant, I said, glaring at Bradley, who was gracious enough to glance. Feeling ashamed of Heather's wedding, my mother hesitantly asked, what about it? Heather's voice softened as she replied, we'd still like you to be there. I looked at her tonight as my sister, not as we previously believed you to be. Trying to look past the years of rivalry and criticism, even if there had been enjoyable moments as well. As kids, we supported one another through our first heartbreaks by sharing secrets and inner jokes that no one else understood. Be there, I said, and then, after giving it some thought, I added, and if. Heather's eyes brightened as she said, As my gift, I could host a dinner for the wedding party here at Mason. Take that action. After how we've treated you, I replied plainly, you're still my sister. To be clear, though, I'm not asking for your approval. Rather, I'm presenting something I'm proud of on my own terms. I would be honored to receive a sincere smile, she added quietly. We spent the first part of the evening together, and I remarked, now I really do need to go. Of course, my father said, pointing to the private dining room, you're. Not always, I told him, but tonight, yes, since business comes first. As they packed to go, I said, I'm free for brunch on Sunday. Not at all. Your club, but there's a little one in the East Village that I believe you should check out. We'll be there, my mom said. Promised, watching them file out of the tiny opening with a sense of relief. Dinner, their viewpoints were forever altered, and I exhaled deeply as the door shut behind them. Everything okay getting there? Miranda asked me as I felt strangely lighter. She continued to laugh at my mother as she said, family is complicated, tell me about it. Introduces me as her daughter, a teenage waitress at Denny's, and I smiled appreciatively. Let's discuss the spring menu so she understands. I have some fresh ideas. Thrilled as we made our way to the kitchen, my haven, my accomplishment. Returning home, I came to the realization that the night's most significant revelation was not showcasing my creations to my family. It was acknowledging completely that I had built my achievement on my own terms, irrespective of their endorsement, and that understanding was more valuable than any affirmation they could possibly provide. My publisher and I had a flurry of spring menu planning sessions over the course of 2 weeks. Regarding the structure of the cookbook and first conversations on a possible second location kept me thankfully busy, but memories of that family meal continued to surface during quiet times that called for introspection. After a very successful Sunday breakfast, I took my family to Alma's, a hidden treasure owned by a former. My parents, a coworker from my early days on the line, had initially shown obvious discomfort with the. Although the walls were covered in graffiti and the chairs were mismatched, the meal was simple. They were won over by a great execution. I had no idea that basic eggs could taste so good. My father acknowledged using handmade sourdough to soak up the remaining shakshuka, but it was only a minor step. Change, but a chance to sit at my regular table after closure. As I observed the employees doing their last tasks, Jessica was tallying the. Listen while Marcus and Jose talked about wine pairings while humming gently. Miranda had left an hour ago after we had made final arrangements for tomorrow's private celebration. My phone flashed with a text from Heather about the spring menu changes, and the wedding planning nightmare florist just multiplied. According to their quote, if you're free for coffee tomorrow, could you please give me some honest advice from someone who won't just tell me what I wanted to hear, and I grinned a little at this sudden request for my viewpoint. I took a further tiny step by texting back to confirm the time and location, and my relationship with my family was growing into something that was unexpected, not the unreserved embrace I had always yearned for, but something. My mother had called for a calibrated respect amongst adults with varied paths and values, which could be more important. Her customary formality has softened into sincere inquiries about my father's work 3 times in the last 2 weeks. Forwarded a piece about female cooks shattering stereotypes in the field as a tacit admission that he was. Ethan had contacted me in an attempt to comprehend my reality, asking if he might bring. I want his kids to visit the kitchen occasionally so they realize they have choices. He had stated that success doesn't have to appear the same to everybody. These were brittle beginnings rather than the spectacular Hollywood movie reconciliation. I discovered that true healing occurs in silence. Little actions and moments in the slow rewriting of historical patterns. However, the biggest shift wasn't in how my family saw me, but rather in how. Eventually, I had ceased gauging my value by their approval of me. I felt oddly superfluous now that I had demonstrated what I had once urgently sought from them. This insight, not to them but to myself, had reverberated through other. Additionally, I started a mentorship program for aspiring chefs from underprivileged origins, providing them with the direction and chance they had so desperately sought. 8 budding culinary artists used the Mason kitchen as a classroom every Saturday morning. Brought up memories of my younger self, who was driven and in need of someone who had faith in their abilities, like Zoe, had demonstrated great promise. Knowing I had extended an apprenticeship offer to her, and seeing her self-assurance rise with each new ability she acquired brought a contentment distinct from any professional honor I've obtained, chef. I was distracted from my thoughts by Jessica's voice. We're ready to close. Is there anything else you need before we leave? No, thank you, I grinned. The staff filed tonight and you all did a fantastic job. I stayed at my table with my notebook open to a blank while they were calling their good nights. I was having trouble finding the right words to describe my journey in the preface to my cookbook. I eventually started writing in the stillness of the deserted restaurant, since food has always been my most authentic language. When words were insufficient, I used flavors to communicate. I followed my palate even when the roads appeared confusing. The dishes in this book are more chapters of a life lived in search of authenticity rather than acceptance than recipes. 5 years ago, I stood at a choice between passion and expectation, which first cost me a lot but eventually resulted in the most extravagant feast I could have ever dreamed of, not only in terms of career achievement, but also in realizing that true wealth isn't judged by material success or approval from others, but by having the guts to stand up for your own opinions even when it speaks in whispers against the cries of uncertainty. I put down my pen, and tomorrow the words will finally flow freely. Create additional difficulties, such as a challenging vendor negotiation, Heather's wedding preparation drama, and finishing the cookbook. Introduction. But at this peaceful time of introspection today, I experienced a deep feeling of calm, even if the trip hadn't been without its challenges, including sleepless nights. So full that I dozed off in the corners of the kitchen during infrequent pauses, leaving scars from cuts and burns that were still apparent on my. I had doubted everything during those tough moments, but I persisted, not because I had to prove anything my value to other people, but since I couldn't fathom living any other way and prioritizing authenticity over acceptance, I'd discovered something more worthwhile than family approval or achievement. I would want to know whether you have ever had to decide between following your own heart and living up to the expectations of others. Share your experiences in the comments section below, and if this video spoke to you, remember to like it and subscribe for more. Share inspiring tales of tenacity and success with someone who might need a reminder that the most crucial. I appreciate you being a part of this journey with me, and keep in mind that approval comes from inside. The greatest success is determined by happiness rather than by other people's standards and meaning you discover on your own journey.